Bibliothèque et Archives Canada aide les Canadiens à mieux comprendre leurs racines. Il agit comme mémoire permanente du gouvernement fédéral et de ses institutions, ainsi que comme gardien du passé lointain et de l'histoire récente de notre pays. The goal of the LAC Foundation is to enhance the visibility of Library and Archives Canada, or LAC, and to position it as a creative force in our cultural ecosystem by raising funds and building innovative partnerships. Les prix Bibliothèque et Archives Canada sont remis à des Canadiens remarquables qui ont contribué de façon exceptionnelle à la création et à la promotion du patrimoine culturel, littéraire et historique de notre pays.
There's a tactile pleasure to seeing the ink flow on a piece of paper. There's that sensory pleasure that makes it feel like a book for me.
Anita Rau Badami is an award-winning novelist who was born in India in 1961 before moving to Canada in 1991. Through the use of humor and memorable characters, her novels deal with the complexities of family life and immigration to the West. Ms. Badami published her first story when she was only 18. She later earned her master's degree in English literature at the University of Calgary, and her graduate thesis became her first novel, Tamarind Mem. Published in 1996, this bestseller explores the complicated forces of memory and familial expectation. In 2000, Ms. Badami was the youngest recipient ever of the Marian Engel Award, which recognizes a Canadian woman author in mid-career. Ms. Badami is currently working on her fifth novel, as well as co-authoring a nonfiction book which deals with issues of ethnicity, immigrant life, memory, history, and politics. In recognition of her role in expanding the understanding of the Canadian experience and the cultural heritage of our country, Anita Rau Badami is a 2023 Library and Archives Canada Scholar.
When I start a project, it's always in a notebook and with one specific fountain pen. I love fountain pens. I love the way the ink flows on paper. And once I feel that all that material that I have in that notebook is actually going to come to life, I move to my laptop, start typing up things, start chapter 1. And somehow that also helps bridge that kind of terror that you might not be able to start the next novel, that beginning moment. By the time I've moved to the computer, I have committed to writing that novel. I still haven't decided whether the main character is going to be male or female even. Sometimes I sketch their faces to clarify for me in my imagination who these people are. I've always loved painting, and I paint for the pure joy of it. I love color. And if I see something that particularly appeals to me, whether it's flowers in a vase, it's somebody's face, it's a building, it's a scene, there's a particular joy in capturing that. Archives and libraries have been part of my life for as long as I remember. Heroes Walk, for instance, was set in early 1980s in Vancouver. I had no idea what was happening in Vancouver at that time. It was really useful for me to go to a library, to go and look at archival photographs, to look at newspapers, to get all that information. When I was a child, the huge treat that my grandfather would grant me on Friday evenings was to walk with me to the closest public library to their home and allow me to take out as many books as I wanted. And that was the biggest thrill for me. Libraries have been my life, and archives have been part of making my fiction.
Computer programming for me is a tool, and the creation or the artworks that are being produced today is really the culture of the times.
Eric Chan, also known as eepmon, is a world-renowned digital artist whose work sits at the intersection of fine arts, design, and technology, fusing art and computer code, the traditional and the modern, as well as the artistic and the commercial. As his alter ego, eepmon, Mr. Chan has collaborated on designs with Canada Goose, Marvel Entertainment, Quantropy, the Peanuts Comics, and the Canada Science and Technology Museum. His work has been acquired by the Canada Council Art Bank, and he has participated in art performances at the Guggenheim Museum. His open data paintings, Intersections, were shown at Gallery O2 Tokyo, HPGRP Gallery New York, Carleton University, and the Ottawa Art Gallery. In 2018, eepmon traveled to China as a delegate on Canada's first creative industries trade mission. And between 2017 and 2021, he served first as a director and then as a vice president of the Canadian Museum Association's Board of Directors. In recognition of his unique ability to create in the ever-changing landscape of contemporary society, Eric Chan, or eepmon, is a 2023 Library and Archives Canada Scholar.
It wasn't that I decided that I was going to be a digital artist, but from a very young age, playing the Nintendo, technology was something that was fascinated, and it became part of my creative process. I remember in college, I was studying in computer science, and there was one particular class that really got me hooked. It was a Java programming class. Programming started to come into my world. And then I realized then afterwards, like, whoa, I can actually create some graphics purely by code and then do some sort of creative expression out of that, using algorithms to create art. Everything starts from my design. The tactile feedback I still enjoy when you're putting your pencil on paper. It's a warm-up process, it's brainstorming, it's ideation. And then what I do afterwards is that once I have enough pieces, then I import it into my computer program, where it's essentially using algorithms to generate multitudes of these pieces like digital Lego. Most of the time, what it generates is usually a bit of a mess, but there are times where I see it, I'm like, like there's something interesting about this particular output. After so many generations and asset collecting, I would then form it together, almost like form like Voltron, to create a portrait that you see in some of the works that I've created. So it's an interplay between allowing the computer to play chance with these algorithms, but what I find myself doing a lot is to also putting a human touch to the conversation. So it's an equilibrium, it's an equal play between myself and the computer program. Archives is everywhere. It's part of our day-to-day lives. And as an artist, I get inspired by these conversations, looking at the different architecture, to creating some of the artworks. In fact, the inside lining of the Canada Goose jacket is a nod to the interior of the Parliament of Canada. And there are symbols in there, like the trillium, the lion that represents the Governor General's coat of arms. So it's a very intuitive process for me, and that's how archives play into my artistic practice.
Ma grand-mère, quand j'étais jeune, je lui demandais souvent « Grand-maman, apprends-moi à parler nous, comment vous remontiez la rivière, comment il était, grand-papa, tout ça. » Pendant longtemps, j'ai cherché à savoir c'est quoi la part autochtone qui a survécu au fait que j'ai grandi en dehors de la communauté.
Michel Jean est un écrivain québécois d'origine Innu. Issu de la communauté de Mastéouiats au Québec, M. Jean est à la fois écrivain, chef d'antenne, animateur et journaliste d'enquête. Il a su émouvoir des milliers de personnes grâce à son œuvre littéraire qui vise notamment à sensibiliser le lectorat aux enjeux autochtones. De nombreux ouvrages écrits par M. Jean parlent de ses origines innues et de l'expérience des peuples autochtones au Canada. Dans ses romans, il aborde de manière sensible des sujets complexes, voire douloureux, comme les pensionnats et l'itinérance autochtone à Montréal. Lauréat de plusieurs prix et distinctions, M. Jean est fait compagnon de l'Ordre des Arts et des Lettres du Québec en 2022. En guise de reconnaissance de sa grande contribution à la culture et à la mémoire collective canadienne à travers son œuvre littéraire et son œuvre journalistique considérable, Michel Jean est lauréat d'un prix Bibliothèque et Archives Canada 2023.
La vie en territoire, c'est quelque chose que je n'ai pas connu, mais le territoire, il m'habite depuis que je suis tout petit. J'ai grandi avec la forêt dans mon cœur quand même, parce qu'on en a toujours parlé. Dans mes romans aujourd'hui, je ne raconte pas beaucoup la vie en réserve, parce que je pense qu'il faut vraiment l'avoir vécu pour bien en parler. La vie en territoire, j'ai l'impression de l'avoir habité, moi, le territoire. Je pense que quelque part, ça, c'est le travail de l'écrivain. Il y a une partie qui se passe dans son imagination, puis l'autre partie, ça se passe dans la vraie vie, puis au bout du compte, ça se retrouve dans les livres. Il faut comprendre que les jeunes Inuits, ils ne se voient nulle part. On n'est pas dans les livres d'histoire, on n'est pas à la télévision, on n'est pas beaucoup dans les arts, on est très peu présent dans la politique, même si tout ça commence à changer, pour le mieux. Quand j'ai écrit mon roman « Kokum », qui raconte la sédentarisation forcée des Inuits et des Autochtones à travers l'histoire de ma famille, et ensuite l'impact qu'ont eu les pensionnats autochtones sur les communautés, j'ai eu beaucoup de jeunes autochtones qui sont venus me voir puis qui étaient contents d'enfin comprendre qu'est-ce qui s'était passé dans leur communauté. Ça a longtemps été tabou dans les communautés. Alors aujourd'hui, je pense qu'on a une nouvelle génération d'écrivains qui commencent à raconter des histoires. C'est à nous d'abord de raconter nos histoires. Je pense que les archives, c'est fondamental parce que ce sont les témoins du temps. On oublie beaucoup de choses, mais les archives, elles le retiennent. Tu sais. Ce qui est inscrit puis ce qui est écrit reste. Pour les Autochtones, malheureusement, on n'est pas en archives. À cause de l'histoire, puis à cause de la nature même du pays, puis aussi du fait que les Autochtones ne venaient pas d'une culture de l'écrit, ils venaient d'une culture de l'oral. Et l'histoire orale, le problème avec, c'est que ça se limite aux gens qui sont encore vivants. Et beaucoup de choses qu'on veut savoir remontent à plus longtemps que ça. Alors on a une limite là, qui est difficile. Moi, j'écris d'abord pour les Autochtones, je le dis souvent parce que je veux qu'ils soient fiers de leur histoire, mais j'écris aussi pour les Autochtones parce que je veux qu'il y ait la version autochtone de leur propre histoire, parce que c'est aussi leur histoire. Mais pendant longtemps, on avait juste un côté. Moi, j'essaie de donner l'autre côté. Puis après ça, c'est aux gens à décider qu'est-ce qu'ils en font. C'est eux qui ont le livre dans les mains puis qui décident si cette histoire-là, ils l'apprennent ou pas. Mais ça reste que c'est leur histoire aussi.
I hope that future generations learn the vast beauty, depth, and complexity of Indigenous culture and peoples from not just Turtle Island, but around the world.
Kevin Loring is an award-winning playwright, actor, and director from the Nklapamuk First Nation in Lytton, British Columbia. In his work, he uses Indigenous theater methodologies and language to explore issues affecting Indigenous peoples. As an actor, Mr. Loring has performed in roles on both the big and small screens and on stages across the country. He has also worked extensively as a voice actor for animation. In 2012, Mr. Loring created the Songs of the Land project, which explores audio recordings from the late 1800s and early 1900s of songs and stories of the Nklapamuk First Nation. As part of this project, Mr. Loring has written several plays tackling difficult topics such as domestic violence and abuse of power, youth and elder neglect, and the introduction of death into the universe. In 2017, he became the first artistic director of Indigenous theater at the National Arts Centre of Canada. In recognition of his work to bring Indigenous stories and songs to audiences in Indigenous communities and to stages across the country, Kevin Loring is a 2023 Library and Archives Canada Scholar.
I've always been an actor/playwright, and now also an actor/playwright/director. So I look at it from a similar perspective. As an actor, you're there to deliver the words, connect to the characters in the moment, hit your mark. That's your craft. As a writer, as you're generating material, you're relying on source. And for me as an Indigenous playwright, sources are elders, sources are history and stories that you know from your community or referencing your own displacement from that community. When I began Ash Itlam Adamich, the Songs of the Land, I knew that there were recordings that existed. James Alexander Tate, and he's quite a renowned ethnographer, and he recorded thousands of hours of our songs, stories, culture. And so I hosted a week-long gathering. We just opened it up to the community to talk about how do we use this as source material? Should we use these songs and stories for source material for this project? And at the end of the day, they all said, yes, we need to bring these songs and stories back into the world. That was a very important step in my process as an artist, but also as an Nklapamuk, to be able to gather the community and to have this conversation in this way. I think that what's super important for Indigenous communities as we're trying to decolonize and move away from that colonial history and heal, ultimately, like we need to reclaim and repair what was broken. And so the archives and what was collected and those histories that exist are vital to knowing where we came from, knowing what we've been through, and also to know what's missing, where we have gaps in our memory, gaps in our archival materials. Identifying those gaps and finding a way to fill them from a culturally sensitive perspective will be really powerful going forward.
I have focused my research and my storytelling over the years on giving voice to the silent, giving presence to the invisible.
Dorothy Williams is a historian, author, and researcher who specializes in the history of Black Canadians. Dr. Williams grew up in the historic Black community of Little Burgundy in Montreal. In 1995, she founded the nonprofit organization Ethnocultural Diffusions to collect the oral history of Blacks in Montreal. She later launched BlackBiblio.com Inc. to record Canada's Black history sources. Dr. Williams helped create the ABCs of Canadian Black History, a resource kit for teachers and students. She also teaches the popular Concordia University course, Black Montreal, which aims to dispel myths and misconceptions around Montreal's Black history. For her work, Dr. Williams has been honored with many awards and was named a Quebec laureate in 2002. In 2022, she was the subject of the first exhibition at the Afro Museum, Quebec's first Black museum, and was also named as one of CBC Quebec's 2022 Black Changemakers. In recognition of her efforts to make resources related to the historical presence of Black Canadians more widely available, Dorothy Williams is a 2023 Library and Archives Canada Scholar.
It's so important, I think, for future generations to recognize that Blacks have been part of the Canadian narrative since Samuel de Champlain. And it's important to then understand our role. And our role did not begin in the 1960s or the 1950s. It's hundreds of years in this country. Archives are repositories of our heritage as a country. They're really critical, and the nice thing about archives is they lead you places. You think you're going to find XYZ, maybe you will, but you'll also see all kinds of other stuff that you hadn't even imagined. Most of our knowledge that we had when I was growing up, certainly popularized, was Americans. They were on the news. They were the focus of Black cultural history. And I wanted to ensure that my story, which is a Canadian story, was also heard. The kit was designed to break the silence of Black Canadian history. I wanted to ensure that there were stories in there from British Columbia all the way to Nova Scotia. I wanted to ensure that it included women's stories as well as men. I'm guiding the teachers in the kit about the ways in which they can approach the subject for their students. So it really is a tool to help them to teach Black history. It allows the teacher to become a storyteller. It allows them to introduce the Black experience in their classrooms. For a lot of them, the stories that I'm bringing to the table, whether it's online or in front of them or I'm doing webinars or whatever, this is brand new information. So it's important for us to understand that we need to broaden our knowledge of Canada from a cultural perspective. Why? Just look at your classrooms today. They're not just French and English kids sitting in front of you. We have many, many cultures. And these students need to learn how to live with each other, and then when they grow up, how to work with each other, and how to respect and understand where they all fit within the narrative, and that all of it together is the Canadian narrative. See, that's where archives are important.
Hello, bonjour. Je m'appelle David Rau et je suis vice-président Relations avec les gouvernements et les collectivités pour Air Canada. C'est un plaisir pour Air Canada de célébrer cet événement avec vous. Nous sommes fiers d'être un partenaire fondateur des prix Bibliothèque et Archives Canada. As the country's national carrier, we value our Canadian heritage and our role in promoting Canada's extraordinary culture and partnering with organizations that brings communities together to celebrate our values. On behalf of Air Canada and our 32,000 employees, thank you for your exceptional work. Nos sincères félicitations à tous les récipiendaires. Merci, thank you.